The air at the St. Regis Grand Ballroom shimmered thick with the scent of money and Chanel No. 5. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos at the annual Vanguard Foundation Gala. For Elara Thorne, this glittering world had become a beautiful cage. She stood beside her husband, the magnate Julian Thorne, a perfect porcelain doll on his arm. But under the polite smiles and the flash of camera bulbs, a storm was brewing. No one in that room could have predicted that within the hour, the velvet ropes and champagne flutes would become the backdrop for a brutal act of humiliation that would shatter a dynasty and ignite a war no one saw coming. The weight of the Thorne diamond necklace felt like a collar on Elara's neck. Each of the 24 flawless diamonds, a personal gift from her husband Julian for her 24th birthday, seemed to absorb the light and warmth of the room, leaving her feeling cold. She ran a gloved finger over the largest stone, a perfect pear-cut centerpiece. Julian had called it the Tear of Elysium. Tonight it felt prophetic. Julian Thorne was not just a man. He was an institution. The CEO of Thorne Industries, a global logistics empire he had inherited and ruthlessly expanded. He moved through the gala like a shark in its own aquarium. People parted for him. Voices hushed. His smile, a brilliant flash of white, rarely reached the cold, calculating blue of his eyes. And for 10 years, Elara had been his most prized acquisition. She had met him when she was a promising architectural student, full of dreams of designing sustainable public spaces. He'd been a guest lecturer at her university. Powerful, charming, and utterly captivating. He'd swept her off her feet, promising her the world. And he had delivered it piece by gleaming hollow piece. Her dreams of architecture were gently put aside, replaced by the full-time job of being Mrs. Thorne charity boards, social events, and managing their sprawling estates in the Hamptons and Lake Como. "Darling, you look breathtaking," Julian murmured, his hand possessively on the small of her back. His touch was no longer a comfort. It was a brand. "Senator Davies is waving us over." "Smile." Elara produced a smile. It was practiced perfect and didn't touch her own eyes. She felt a familiar prickle of unease as they approached the senator's table. In recent months, Julian's affection had cooled to an Arctic frost. His compliments felt like commands, his presence an exercise in surveillance. The late-night board meetings and unexplained weekend trips had become more frequent. She wasn't naive, but she had clung to the hope that it was a phase, a symptom of the immense pressure he was under. As Julian engaged the senator in a deep discussion about shipping tariffs, Elara's gaze drifted across the ballroom. And then she saw her, Isabella Vance. She was a junior PR executive at Thorne Industries, a woman who seemed to be made of sharp angles and ambition. Her dress was a slash of crimson silk that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, audacious statement in a room of elegant pastels and classic blacks. Her laughter, loud and throaty, cut through the polite murmur of the crowd, and it was directed at Julian. Across the room, Julian's eyes met Isabella's. It was a fleeting glance, but it contained a universe of secrets. A shared joke, a spark of intimacy, a silent promise. The cold dread in Elara's stomach solidified into a certainty that was as hard and unforgiving as the diamonds around her neck. This wasn't just a dalliance. This was something more. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She needed air. Excusing herself with a quiet murmur, she made her way towards the terrace, her satin gown rustling against the marble floors. The whispers followed her. "Doesn't she look divine? The perfect couple. He adores her." The words were like tiny, poisonous darts against her skin. On the terrace, the cool night air was a relief. She leaned against the balustrade, looking out over the city lights that glittered like a fallen constellation. She had given up everything for him. Her name, her career, her very identity had been subsumed into his. She was no longer Elara Sterling, the bright young architect. She was Elara Thorne, an accessory. A shadow fell over her, hiding from the adoring public. She turned. It was Isabella Vance. Up close, her beauty was almost aggressive. Her makeup was flawless, her dark hair styled in a severe chic bob. Her smile was a predatory slash of red lipstick. "Just getting some air," Elara replied, her voice more steady than she felt. "It's a wonderful party, isn't it?" Isabella said, her eyes scanning Elara's dress, her jewelry, with a look that was part envy, part appraisal. "Julian has such impeccable taste. In everything." The insinuation was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Elara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "My husband is a man of high standards, yes?" Isabella laughed, that same throaty sound from across the ballroom. "Oh, I know. He's been telling me all about his standards. He says he's looking to divest from certain assets that are no longer providing a return." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Face it, Elara, your stock has plummeted. You're a relic from a bygone era in his life, the dutiful little wife. Men like Julian don't want to be dutiful. They want exciting." Every word was a calculated strike designed to wound. Elara felt a surge of fury, hot and sharp, cutting through her shock. "And I suppose you're an exciting new venture." "I'm the future," Isabella stated, her arrogance absolute. "He's just waiting for the right moment to tell you. But I thought I'd give you a heads up. A woman-to-woman courtesy." The courtesy was a declaration of war. Before Elara could formulate a response, Julian appeared at the terrace doors. His face, which had been a mask of public affability, was now dark with irritation. "Elara, what are you doing out here?" "Senator Davies was asking for you." He saw Isabella, and his expression flickered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of annoyance that she was there. "Isabella, back to the floor." "Of course, Julian," Isabella said, giving Elara a triumphant little smirk before gliding away. Julian turned his full, frigid attention to his wife. "What were you two talking about?" "She was just complimenting the party." Elara lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Don't lie to me," he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "I saw your face. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" she whispered, incredulous. "Julian, she practically told me you two are..." "Enough!" He snapped, his grip tightening on her arm. "You are my wife. You will stand by my side, you will smile, and you will not embarrass me. Is that understood?" The pressure on her arm was painful. "This conversation is over. We are going back inside." He didn't wait for her reply. He began to pull her back towards the ballroom doors, his fingers digging into her flesh. She stumbled, trying to regain her footing and her dignity. This was the moment she should have screamed, should have fought back. But a decade of conditioning of being the placid, perfect Mrs. Thorne had stolen her voice. She allowed him to lead her back into the glittering cage, her mind reeling, completely unaware that the polite performance was over and the true, brutal spectacle was about to begin. The return to the ballroom was a surreal blur. The orchestra swelled, playing a soaring waltz, but to Elara it sounded like a funeral dirge. The glittering lights of the chandeliers seemed to mock her, illuminating the charade she was forced to play. Julian's hand was a manacle on her arm, his smile a rictus of civility, pasted on for the benefit of their audience. He guided her back to their table, where a circle of business titans and their wives greeted them with oblivious pleasantries. "There you are." "We were just saying, Julian, you have the most beautiful wife in New York," boomed Marcus Blackwood, a shipping rival with a booming voice and a disingenuous smile. "I'm a lucky man." Julian said the words, tasting like ash in Elara's mouth. He squeezed her arm again, a silent command. "Play along." Elara forced another smile, her facial muscles aching from the effort. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, yet she had never felt more invisible. She was a ghost at her own feast, watching her life crumble from a distance. Her gaze kept darting towards Isabella, who was now holding court near the bar, laughing with a group of younger executives, occasionally flicking her eyes towards their table with undisguised contempt. The gala's host, a famed philanthropist, took the stage to begin the charity auction. Item after item went for astronomical sums a week on a private yacht, a Picasso sketch, a bespoke sports car. Julian, ever the showman, entered a bidding war for a rare bottle of 1945 Romanée Conti wine, driving the price up to $250,000 with a flick of his wrist. The room applauded his largesse. Elara felt sick. It was all a game, a display of power and dominance. He wasn't buying wine, he was buying adoration. It was during the final auction item, a private concert with a world-renowned pianist, that Julian leaned in close, his breath warm and laced with expensive whiskey. "I need to have a word with my CFO. Stay here. Don't move." It wasn't a request. He stood and walked away, not towards his CFO, but directly towards the bar, where Isabella was standing. Elara watched, frozen, as he placed a hand on the small of Isabella's back, the exact same gesture he had used on her all night. But this time, it was different. It was intimate, familiar. Isabella leaned into him, whispering something in his ear. Julian threw his head back and laughed, a genuine, uninhibited laugh that Elara hadn't heard directed at her in years. The sight was a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The polite fiction they had maintained all evening, all year, was shattered by that single public gesture. The whispers around the table died down. Heads began to turn. Marcus Blackwood's wife, Catherine, gave Elara a pitying look that was worse than any insult. This was it. The public execution Isabella had promised, fueled by a sudden reckless surge of adrenaline and a decade of suppressed rage. Elara stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the momentary lull. She had to know. She had to hear it from him. She walked on trembling legs across the ballroom, her path a straight line to her husband and his mistress. The room seemed to fade into a tunnel with only the three of them at the end. As she approached, she could hear Isabella's syrupy voice. "So I told him if he wants the Apex account, he'll have to go through me. And Julian, darling, you should have seen his face." "Julian!" Elara's voice was a ragged whisper. They both turned. Julian's face hardened into a mask of pure fury. The affable CEO vanished, replaced by the cold tyrant she knew in private. Isabella's expression was one of pure venomous triumph. "What do you think you're doing?" Julian snarled under his breath, trying to keep his voice low, but the anger was palpable. "I want to go home," Elara said, her voice shaking but firm. "Now." "We'll go home when I say we go home," he retorted. "You are making a spectacle of yourself. Go back to the table." "No," she said, the word feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. I will not sit there and be humiliated. Not anymore. Isabella chose that moment to twist the knife. She looped her arm through Julian's, pressing herself against his side. Darling, I think your wife is feeling a little overwhelmed. Maybe she needs a glass of water, or a new life. The blatant possessiveness, the casual cruelty of the gesture finally broke something inside Elara. All the years of biting her tongue, of smoothing things over, of accepting his coldness as a byproduct of his genius, it all evaporated in a blaze of white-hot anger. "Get your hands off my husband," Elara said, her voice low and trembling, with a rage she didn't know she possessed. Julian's face went dark. "You've lost your mind." He grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron. "You are leaving, now!" He started to pull her towards the exit, but she resisted, trying to wrench her arm free. "Let go of me, Julian." Her resistance seemed to flip a switch in him. The last vestiges of his public control snapped. In front of the silent, staring elite of New York City, Julian Thorne, the titan of industry, lost his composure. "You want to leave?" he roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. The music stuttered to a halt. "Fine, we'll leave." He released her wrist, but only for a second. In a move of shocking primitive brutality, he tangled his hand in her carefully coiffed hair, grabbing a fistful of her long, dark locks near the scalp. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Elara cried out a sharp sound of pain and disbelief. The pull was agonizing, sending shooting stars of fire across her scalp. He began to drag her. He dragged her past their table, past the horrified faces of their friends and business associates. He dragged her across the gleaming marble floor, her satin shoes skidding her gown, twisting around her legs. The Thorne diamond necklace swung wildly, its cold weight choking her. Camera flashes, once a glamorous backdrop, now exploded in her face like strobing accusatory spotlights. It was a nightmare made real. Each step was a fresh wave of agony and abject shame. Her world narrowed to the searing pain in her head, the rough feel of the carpet as she stumbled from the marble, and the sound of her own ragged breathing. And through it all, one sound cut through her haze of pain and humiliation. It was laughter, clear, high, and triumphant. She twisted her head, her neck screaming in protest, and saw Isabella Vance standing by the bar. Her arms were crossed, her head tilted, and she was watching the entire sordid spectacle with a one delighted smile on her face. She was not just watching, she was savoring it. This was her coronation performed over the broken body of the previous queen. The look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated victory. Julian didn't stop until they were in the grand foyer. He shoved her towards the massive oak doors, releasing her hair. Elara crumpled to the floor, landing hard on her hands and knees. She was shaking uncontrollably, her scalp on fire, her mind a whirlwind of white noise. The doorman, a man named Michael, who had always greeted her with a kind smile, stood frozen in shock. Julian loomed over her, his chest heaving. His face was a contorted mask of rage. He straightened his tuxedo jacket, a bizarre gesture of normalcy in the midst of madness. "You wanted to leave," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "There's the door. Get out. Don't ever come back to my house." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and threw a few $100 bills at her feet. They fluttered down onto the pristine floor around her. "For a taxi. You're no longer my concern." With that, he turned on his heel and strode back into the ballroom, leaving her kneeling on the cold floor in her ruined gown. Her hair in disarray, with nothing but the laughter of his mistress echoing in her ears. The cold of the marble floor seeped through the thin satin of her gown, a chilling reality check that this was not a dream. For a long moment, Elara remained on her hands and knees in the grand foyer of the St. Regis, unable to move. The world had tilted on its axis. The muffled sounds of the gala restarting within the ballroom, a nervous cough. The tentative restart of the orchestra were an insult to the violence that had just occurred. The doorman, Michael, finally broke his paralysis. He rushed to her side, his face a mess of concern and pity. "Mrs. Thorne? Ma'am, are you all right?" His kindness was the thing that broke her. A choked sob escaped her lips. She couldn't speak. Shame was a physical weight pressing down on her, crushing the air from her lungs. She was Elara Thorne, a woman whose photo graced society pages, a woman envied for her poise and grace. Now she was a heap on the floor, publicly discarded like trash. Michael helped her to her feet, his touch gentle and respectful. "Let me call you a car, ma'am. Please." She shook her head, unable to process the logistics of where. The Hamptons estate, the Fifth Avenue penthouse. They weren't her homes. They were his houses. He had made that brutally clear. She fumbled in her small clutch for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. The scattered $100 bills on the floor felt like a final obscene gesture of his power over her. She scrolled through her contacts with a trembling thumb, past names of society, friends, who were likely already whispering about her downfall inside that ballroom. She stopped at one name, Chloe. Chloe Jensen had been her best friend in college, her maid of honor, and the one person who had always seen through Julian's glossy facade. A fiercely independent investigative journalist, Chloe had viewed Elara's marriage with loving skepticism from the start. They had drifted apart as Elara was consumed by the demands of Julian's world, but the bond was still there, a lifeline in the darkness. She pressed the call button. Chloe answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert. "Elara. It's after midnight. Is everything okay?" "Chloe." Elara whispered the name of a prayer. Can you come get at me?" The words shattered as she said them, and the sobs she had been holding back erupted raw and ragged. "Where are you? What happened?" Chloe's voice was instantly stripped of sleepiness, replaced by urgent concern. "The St. Regis," Elara choked out. Julian, he threw me out." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, "I'm on my way. Don't move. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The 15 minutes felt like a lifetime. Michael discreetly led her to a small private alcove off the main foyer, shielding her from the curious glances of hotel guests. He brought her a glass of water, his quiet dignity a stark contrast to her husband's barbarism. When Chloe's familiar beat-up hatchback pulled up to the curb, it looked more beautiful to Elara than any limousine she had ever ridden in. Chloe burst out of the driver's side, her eyes taking in Elara's disheveled state, the tear-streaked face, the wild hair, the gown that looked like a costume from another life. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around Elara, holding her tight. In that embrace, 10 years of carefully constructed walls crumbled, and Elara wept. In the safety of Chloe's small, cluttered apartment in the village, an apartment filled with books, research papers, and the scent of coffee, the story came tumbling out. The affair, the confrontation, the dragging, the laughter. Chloe listened, her expression hardening from concern to a cold, simmering fury. "That monster," she said, her voice tight. "That narcissistic, abusive monster. I knew it. I always knew there was something rotten under all that polish." She handed Elara a mug of chamomile tea. "First things first. You're staying here. You're safe. Second, we need to think. He won't just let this go." Chloe was right. By 2 a.m., Elara's phone began to buzz incessantly. A text from Julian's personal assistant, Mr. Thorne, has requested the immediate return of the company credit cards. A minute later, an email notification. "Your access to the Thorne private banking portal has been suspended." He was cutting her off swiftly and surgically, severing every financial tie that bound them. The tear of Elysium necklace, still around her neck, suddenly felt like stolen property. "He's trying to leave you with nothing," Chloe said, pacing the small living room. "He thinks he can throw you out, humiliate you, and you'll just disappear." "What can I do?" Elara asked, her voice hollow. "He has the best lawyers in the country. There's a prenup. I signed it without even reading it. I was so in love." "We'll find a way around the prenup," Chloe said fiercely. "They're not ironclad, especially under circumstances of public abuse and infidelity. But that's not the first move. He attacked you in public, Elara. There were hundreds of witnesses, and paparazzi." As if on cue, Chloe's laptop dinged with a news alert. She opened it, and her face went pale. She turned the screen towards Elara. It was the front page of a major online tabloid. The headline screamed, "Twy Coon's Tirade. Julian Thorne evicts hysterical wife, Elara from charity gala." The lead photo was a blurry, horrific shot of Julian. His face contorted in a snarl, his hand tangled in her hair as he dragged her through the foyer. But it was the accompanying article that was the real poison. Quoting anonymous sources from inside the event, it painted Elara as an unstable, jealous wife who had caused a drunken scene after misinterpreting a friendly conversation between her husband and a young colleague. It spun Julian's violence as a desperate attempt to calmly remove his overwrought wife from the situation to save her further embarrassment. Isabella's fingerprints were all over it. It was a PR masterpiece of character assassination. "They're already controlling the narrative." Elara whispered the words like acid. "They're making me the villain." "Of course they are," Chloe spat, slamming the laptop shut. "It's what they do. They crush, they spin, they destroy. But they've made one critical mistake." Elara looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and confused. "What?" Chloe knelt in front of her, taking her friend's trembling hands in her own. Her eyes, usually so cynical and world-weary from her job, now burned with a fire Elara hadn't seen in years. "They underestimated you," Chloe said, her voice low and intense. "Julian, that crimson-clad viper, the whole world, they all think you're just a pretty fragile doll that he can break and throw away." She paused, her grip tightening. "But I know who you were before him. Elara Sterling, the smartest woman in our program. The one who could outdesign, outthink, and outwork everyone. She's still in there. He didn't destroy her. He just buried her." A tiny spark flickered in the desolate landscape of Elara's heart. "He thinks this is over," Chloe continued, her voice rising with conviction. "He thinks he won tonight. But this isn't the end, Elara. This is the beginning. We're not going to sue him for alimony. We're not going to fight for a settlement. That's his game played on his field. We're going to do something else." "What?" Elara breathed. "We are going to take everything," Chloe said, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. "His company, his reputation, His legacy. We are going to find every skeleton in his closet, every dirty deal, every secret he's ever buried, and we're going to burn his entire empire to the ground. He dragged you out by your hair. We're going to drag him down by his crown. This is not about revenge. This is about justice. For the first time since she'd felt Julian's hand in her hair, Elara felt something other than pain and humiliation. It was a faint, unfamiliar flicker. It was hope. It was rage, and it was the first stone being laid in the foundation of a war. The days that followed were a blur of legal jargon, bitter coffee, and sleepless nights on Chloe's couch. The world outside raged with the story. Julian's PR machine, captained by Isabella, was working in overdrive. Elara was painted in the society columns as a tragic, unstable figure, while Julian was the long-suffering husband, a pillar of strength dealing with a private family matter. They even floated a narrative about her having a breakdown due to the pressures of public life. It was masterful, and it was suffocating. They're building a cage of lies around you, Chloe said, scrolling through another saccharine article praising Julian's forbearance. We need to break out, and for that, we need a bigger hammer. Chloe's connections as a journalist led them to Ava Chen, a lawyer whose name was whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in corporate circles. Ava wasn't a divorce lawyer. She was a corporate litigator, a specialist in shareholder lawsuits and hostile takeovers. Her office was a minimalist expanse of glass and steel overlooking the financial district, a war room disguised as a workspace. Ava Chen was a woman in her late 40s with an impeccably tailored suit and hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to brook no argument. She listened to Elara's story without interruption, her steepled fingers resting on a polished mahogany desk, her eyes sharp and analytical. She had already reviewed the prenuptial agreement which Chloe had managed to procure from Elara's old files. This is a fortress, Ava said, her voice calm and even, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the document. Julian's father had this drafted. It waives your right to any assets of Thorne Industries, any properties acquired before or during the marriage, and limits spousal support to a pittance contingent on a non-disclosure agreement. It's designed to ensure that a departing spouse leaves with nothing more than what they came in with. Elara's heart sank. So it's hopeless. I didn't say that, Ava corrected, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. I said it was a fortress, and every fortress has a weakness. Usually, it's the arrogance of its architect. She leaned forward. The prenup is voidable under conditions of duress or fraud, but a more potent avenue is to argue that you weren't just a wife. For 10 years, you put your own promising career on hold to become a full-time, unpaid ambassador for the Thorne brand. You hosted diplomats, charmed investors, planned events that directly led to major business deals. You weren't just a spouse, you were a strategic asset. We can argue that a significant portion of the company's growth in the last decade is tied to your unpaid emotional and social labor. We will sue for equity. It was a bold, unconventional strategy, not for a piece of his fortune, but for a piece of his company. But more importantly, Ava continued, a messy public lawsuit is the last thing Julian Thorne wants right now. And Chloe tells me, you suspect he has secrets. Elara nodded slowly. He was always secretive about the company's finances. There were trips to the Cayman Islands he claimed were for investor relations. And there was a project he was obsessed with a few years ago. The Odessa Project. He sank hundreds of millions into it, something about securing new shipping routes in the Black Sea. Then it just vanished. He never spoke of it again, and I heard rumors that it was a catastrophic failure. Chloe leaned in her journalistic instincts, flaring. $100 million failure that was never reported to the shareholders. That's not just bad business. That's potential securities fraud. Exactly, Ava said. This is where we start. Chloe, you're the investigator. Dig into the Odessa Project. Find out what happened, who was involved, where the money went. Elara. Your job is harder. You have to remember everything. Every name he mentioned in his sleep, every document you saw on his desk, every hushed phone call you overheard. Your memory is our treasure map. For the next few weeks, Chloe's apartment transformed into a command center. Elara, fueled by a purpose she hadn't felt in a decade, dredged up memories she had long since buried. She recalled the name of a disgruntled executive Julian had fired around the time of the Odessa Project, a man named Robert Maxwell. She remembered Julian taking frantic calls from a Swiss banker named Luc Dubois. Each name was a breadcrumb. Chloe, using her research skills and a network of sources, vanished down the rabbit hole. She discovered that Robert Maxwell was now living in quiet retirement, bitter and willing to talk off the record. She found that Luc Dubois' bank had a reputation for handling discreet, high-risk transactions. The picture was still fuzzy, but the outline of something large and ugly was beginning to form. One evening, as Elara was meticulously cataloguing every social event she had hosted and cross-referencing them with Thorne Industries' stock performance, an encrypted email arrived in her inbox. The sender was anonymous. The subject line was a single word: Vanguard. Her blood ran cold. The Vanguard Gala. The night her life imploded. Hesitantly, she opened it. The message was brief. Julian Thorne is not the man you think he is, nor is he the man the board thinks he is. What he did to you was dishonorable. What he has done to the company your father helped build is a crime. Look into the shadow ledger for the Odessa Project. Your father would have wanted you to know the truth. A friend of Charles Sterling. Elara stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Charles Sterling, her father. He had been a brilliant engineer who held a senior position at Thorne Industries back when Julian's father was in charge. He had helped innovate the logistics software that was still the backbone of the company. He had died of a heart attack when Elara was in college, but he had always spoken of the Thornes with respect, seeing them as titans of industry. That this friend of her father's was on the board, it was a stunning revelation. There was a secret ally, someone on the inside, watching. Chloe, Ava. She called out, her voice trembling. They crowded around the laptop. Ava read the email, her expression unreadable but intense. A shadow ledger, Ava mused. That means they were cooking the books. The Odessa Project wasn't just a failure he buried. He likely used it as a cover to move money to hide losses or to pay people off. This is the key. If we can find that ledger, we don't just have leverage for a divorce settlement. We have the weapon that can bring him down in his own boardroom. But who is it? Chloe asked. Who is this friend? Elara's mind raced through the faces from the galas, the holiday parties, the weekend retreats, the older stoic members of the board. And then one face came into focus. Alistair Finch. A quiet, dignified man in his 70s, Alistair had been her father's closest colleague. He always greeted her with a sad, knowing smile, as if he saw her father's ghost standing behind her. At the Vanguard Gala just before the end, she had caught his eye. He hadn't been watching the spectacle with horror or pity, but with a look of cold, grim confirmation. "I think I know," Elara said, a newfound strength resonating in her voice. The sword was no longer just an idea. It was being forged in the fires of memory, secrets, and a hidden alliance. And Elara was beginning to feel its weight in her hand. She was no longer a victim fleeing a tyrant. She was a warrior preparing for battle. With the anonymous email as their Rosetta Stone, the investigation accelerated. The name Alistair Finch was a guarded secret between Elara, Chloe, and Ava. They knew he wouldn't risk direct contact again unless it was absolutely critical. His message was clear. He had pointed them to the weapon, but they had to find it and wield it themselves. Chloe, working her sources, discovered that the disgruntled ex-executive Robert Maxwell had been the CFO on the Odessa Project before he was abruptly retired. After a series of cautious off-the-record meetings in quiet coffee shops, Chloe's persistence wore him down. Maxwell, a man broken by Julian's ruthlessness, finally agreed to talk. He spoke of a project doomed from the start, a series of bribes to foreign officials, shell corporations, set up in Panama, and massive unrecorded consulting fees paid to ghost companies. The project's official failure was a cover story. In reality, Julian had used it as a personal slush fund, siphoning off over $200 million to cover massive personal trading losses he'd incurred, and to fund his extravagant lifestyle, including the purchase of a private jet and a villa in St. Bart's, both of which he'd claimed were corporate assets. He called it creative accounting, Maxwell said, stirring his coffee with a trembling hand. I called it grand larceny. When I threatened to go to the board, he ruined me. He manufactured a performance review, accused me of incompetence, and threatened to blacklist me from the entire industry. I had a family, a mortgage. I signed the NDA and walked away. Maxwell didn't have the shadow ledger itself, but he knew how it worked. It was a completely separate set of books, maintained digitally on a highly encrypted air-gapped server in the company's Swiss data center. The only person with direct access was Julian's notoriously loyal CIO, a man named Gregory Finch, no relation to Alistair. It's a digital fortress, Chloe reported back to the war room. Getting to it is impossible without an inside man. Then we won't go through the front door, Ava declared. We'll create a crack in the wall and let the light in. Ava's strategy was twofold. Phase 1 was to apply public pressure. She drafted a legal filing. It wasn't a quiet request for divorce. It was a bombshell lawsuit. It sued not just for divorce, but for a 20% equity stake in Thorne Industries, citing Elara's decade of foundational unpaid labor that directly contributed to the company's brand value and market growth. It also formally alleged extreme emotional distress and public assault. The moment the suit was filed, it was a declaration of war. The story of the hysterical wife was immediately challenged. Elara, who had been in hiding, agreed to one carefully controlled interview with a respected, hard-hitting journalist that Chloe knew. In the interview, Elara was not the fragile, broken woman the world expected. She was composed, articulate, and strong. She didn't sling mud. She simply told her truth calmly and factually. She spoke of her architectural dreams, the subtle ways her career was sidelined, and the escalating isolation of her life. When asked about the night of the gala, she didn't cry. She looked directly into the camera. What happened that night was the culmination of years of private control and emotional abuse, she said, her voice steady. The only difference was that it happened in public. I am not a victim. I am a survivor of a toxic marriage, and I am fighting to reclaim my life and my contribution to the empire I helped build." The interview was a stunning success. Public opinion, once swayed by Julian's PR, began to shift. The hashtag, Judge I Stand with Elara, began to trend. Women's advocacy groups issued statements of support. Suddenly, Julian wasn't a long-suffering husband. He was a public abuser. The cracks in his throne began to show. Sponsors of the Vanguard Foundation started to ask questions. The company's stock took a small but noticeable dip. Julian was furious. He was used to controlling the narrative, and for the first time he had lost it. Meanwhile, Isabella was not enjoying her victory. The life she had envisioned of being the glamorous, powerful new Mrs. Thorne was being tarnished. She was now publicly seen as the other woman in a sordid abuse scandal. Society hostesses who once courted her now gave her the cold shoulder. The dream was souring, and she began to put more and more pressure on Julian. "You need to fix this," she'd shriek at him during frantic phone calls, which were gleefully reported by tabloid sources. "You promised me a kingdom, not a dumpster fire." Her panic made her reckless. Julian, under pressure from all sides, became paranoid and volatile. He started lashing out at his staff, second-guessing his executives. The atmosphere at Thorne Industries grew toxic. This was phase 2 of Ava's plan, sow internal chaos. Chloe, using Maxwell's information, crafted an anonymous, highly detailed tip and leaked it to a bulldog financial reporter at the Wall Street Sentinel, known for his tenacity. The tip didn't mention the shadow ledger, but it raised specific, pointed questions about the astronomical and unexplained losses of the Odessa Project, and hinted at shareholder deception. The article that followed was an earthquake. It didn't make outright accusations, but it asked enough of the right questions to spook the market. Thorne Industries Black Sea. Black hole, the headline read. The stock dropped 5% in a single day. The board of directors, who had previously been content to let Julian handle his domestic issues, were now panicking. They called an emergency meeting. Julian was trapped. He had to reassure the board, but he couldn't reveal the truth. He was forced to lie, to obfuscate, to create a web of complex falsehoods to explain the missing funds. He blamed Maxwell. He blamed rogue contractors. He blamed geopolitical instability. It was during this time of intense pressure that Alistair Finch made his move. He knew Julian would be distracted his focus on the board and the stock price. Finch, leveraging his decades of trust and seniority, approached Gregory Finch, the CIO. He didn't accuse me. He expressed concern. He spoke about loyalty to the company, to the shareholders, and to the legacy of Julian's father. He subtly hinted that the ship was taking on water, and that every man needed to decide if he was going down with the captain. He didn't ask for the ledger. He just planted a seed of doubt in the mind of the one man who held the key. A day after the board meeting, a plain manila envelope was delivered by courier to Ava Chen's office. There was no return address. Inside was a single encrypted USB drive. Ava plugged it into a secure offline laptop. She typed in the password Alistair had sent in a second, separate encrypted message, Charles, Sterling, 1958. A spreadsheet bloomed on the screen. It was the shadow ledger, a meticulous, damning record of every illegal transaction, every bribe, every siphoned dollar. It detailed how Julian had defrauded his own company of nearly $250 million. Ava Chen looked up from the screen, a grim, triumphant smile on her face. "We've got it," she said to Elara and Chloe. "The sword is not only forged, it's razor sharp." The time for quiet maneuvering was over. The time for the final confrontation had arrived. Ava immediately began drafting a letter, not to Julian, but to each member of the Thorne Industries Board of Directors, calling for a special session to present evidence of gross financial misconduct by the CEO. The coup was about to begin. The Thorne Industries boardroom was on the 80th floor, a glass-walled chamber that offered a godlike view of the city below. It was a room built for power, with a long obsidian table, polished to a mirror shine, and 20 high-backed leather chairs. It was Julian's sanctuary, his throne room. And today it was to be his gallows. Julian entered the room with a confident stride, but the strain was visible around his eyes. He believed this emergency meeting, called by Ava Chen on behalf of a major stakeholder, was a desperate legal maneuver by Elara, a gambit to pressure him into a larger divorce settlement. He was prepared to swat it away like a fly. He nodded curtly to the board members, his gaze lingering for a second on Alistair Finch, who met his look with an unreadable, placid expression. "Let's get this farce over with," Julian announced, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I assume Ms. Chen has some trumped-up claims to waste our time with." The door opened, and Ava Chen walked in, followed by Chloe. But it was the third person who made the entire room draw a collective breath. Elara. This was not the society wife they knew. She wore a simple, elegant, dark grey sheath dress. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional bun. The only piece of jewelry she wore was a simple gold necklace her father had given her for her 16th birthday. Gone was the timid, accommodating Mrs. Thorne. In her place stood Elara Sterling, a woman radiating a cold, focused calm that was more intimidating than any outburst. She took a seat opposite Julian, her eyes locking with him across the polished table. The flicker of shock in his eyes was her first small victory. He hadn't expected her to have the audacity to face him here in his domain. "Mr. Thorne, members of the board," Ava began, her voice crisp and clear. "We are not here to discuss a domestic dispute. We are here to discuss a matter of fiduciary duty and gross corporate malfeasance." Julian scoffed. "This is a pathetic attempt to extort money. Whatever fantasy my soon-to-be ex-wife has cooked up." "This is no fantasy, Julian," Elara said, her voice cutting through his. It was the first time she had spoken, and the sound of it, clear, strong, and devoid of fear, silenced him. Every head in the room turned to her. "For 10 years," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the board members, many of whom she had hosted in her home. "I stood by this man. I helped him build the image of Thorne Industries as a stable, respectable, family-led institution. An image I have now learned that is built on a foundation of lies." Ava Chen nodded to Chloe, who placed a sleek tablet on the table and with a few taps activated the boardroom's main screen. The shadow ledger appeared line by damning line. "What you are looking at," Ava said, "is a detailed record of the Odessa Project, a project that was not a business failure, but a meticulously planned $240 million fraud perpetrated by your CEO to cover personal debts and fund a lifestyle you were told was paid for by his personal wealth." Julian's face went from ruddy to ashen. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. He looked at Alistair Finch, who simply stared back his disappointment, a palpable force in the room. He had been betrayed from the inside. "This is fabricated," Julian sputtered, slamming his fist on the table. "This is a forged document, created by a bitter, vengeful woman." "Is it?" Ava countered smoothly. "Then perhaps you can explain the wire transfers to shell corporations in Panama that match to the dollar the purchase of your villa in St. Bart's, or the payments to consultants who are in fact art dealers from whom you purchased several pieces of your private collection." We have the receipts, Mr. Thorne. We have the bank records. We have sworn testimony from your former CFO, Robert Maxwell." The board members murmured amongst themselves, their expressions shifting from skepticism to alarm. They were businessmen. They understood numbers, and the numbers on the screen told a story of catastrophic betrayal. Elara spoke again, her voice resonating with the quiet authority of truth. "This isn't just about money. It's about the soul of this company. My father, Charles Sterling, helped build the software that is the heart of this empire. He believed in integrity. He believed in the Thorne name. Julian has spat on that legacy. He has risked this entire company, your company, to fuel his own greed." She then looked directly at Julian, her eyes holding no hatred, only a profound and final judgment. "You thought I was just an accessory, something you could own and then discard. You tried to break me, to humiliate me, to silence me. But you forgot that I lived in your house for 10 years. I saw the late-night papers you tried to hide. I heard the hushed phone calls. I saw the fear in your eyes when the market turned. You didn't just underestimate me, Julian. You forgot I was even there." It was a fatal oversight. Alistair Finch cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "I have seen the evidence presented by Ms. Chen and Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice heavy with gravitas. "I have also conducted my own internal review. The allegations are not only credible, they are undeniable. Julian Thorne has systematically defrauded this company and its shareholders. He has cancer in this boardroom. I move for a vote of no confidence and his immediate termination for cause." Another board member seconded the motion immediately. Julian looked around the table, his eyes wide with panic, searching for an ally. He found none. He saw only the cold, hard faces of businessmen cutting their losses. The vote was a formality. Unanimous. "This is preposterous! You can't do this," Julian roared, rising to his feet. "I am Thorne Industries." "No," Alistair said, his voice like a chipping stone. "You are not. You are a disgrace to your father's name. Security will see you out. You are to have no further access to this building or any company assets." 2 security guards entered the room, their presence prearranged. They stood on either side of Julian. The color drained from his face as he realized the finality of it all. His empire, his power, his identity all gone in the space of 15 minutes. As the guards escorted a stunned, sputtering Julian Thorne from the room, he passed by Elara. He stopped for a moment, his face a mask of disbelief and pure hatred. "You," he whispered venomously. "You did this." Elara met his gaze without flinching. "No, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. "You did this to yourself. You just thought no one was watching." He was escorted out. The door clicked shut, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. The reckoning was over. Elara Sterling had not just won her freedom, she had taken the throne. In the aftermath of the boardroom coup, the fallout was swift and spectacular. Julian Thorne's world imploded. Facing an SEC investigation and criminal fraud charges, his empire was dismantled, and his name became a synonym for corporate disgrace. The man who once commanded rooms with his presence was reduced to a grim-faced figure on the courthouse steps. Isabella Vance, whose ambition had been her driving force, vanished entirely. With Julian's assets frozen and her reputation destroyed, she disappeared from the social scene, a ghost of the life she had so desperately craved. But this story was never truly about their downfall. It was about Elara's rise. As part of a confidential settlement, Elara secured the 20% equity stake she had fought for. She didn't stay to rule over the rubble of Julian's empire. Instead, she systematically sold her shares and used the immense capital to create the Sterling Foundation, a charity dedicated to funding scholarships for women in architecture. She had won her freedom, and she was now using it to build doors for others. Leaving New York behind, she returned to her roots on the West Coast, settling in a quiet town overlooking the Pacific. There she finally built a house for herself, not a cold mansion of marble and expectation, but a warm, light-filled structure of wood and glass that embraced the rugged landscape. She opened a small but acclaimed architectural firm, Sterling & Associates, focusing on the sustainable community projects she had once dreamed of. She was no longer Elara Thorne, the tycoon's wife. She was Elara Sterling, the architect. Years later, standing on the deck of the house she built, she watched the sunset with Chloe. "Do you ever think about him?" Chloe asked gently. Elara smiled, a look of profound peace on her face. "I think of him as a lesson," she said. "A story about a man so obsessed with power, he built his own cage. But that story is over. This is my story now." The wind from the ocean caught her hair, and she didn't shield her face. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had learned to command the wind. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that the most gilded cages are still cages. It's a story about the brutal reality of hidden abuse and the terrifying power of public humiliation. But more than that, it's a story of incredible resilience. It shows that your lowest moment, the moment you feel most broken and exposed, does not have to be your ending. It can be the beginning of a battle you never knew you had the strength to fight. It proves that true power isn't about wealth or status. It's about reclaiming your own voice, your own name, and your own truth. Have you ever felt underestimated or silenced? Have you witnessed someone being judged unfairly by the court of public opinion? If Elara's journey from a discarded wife to the architect of her own destiny resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who might need to hear a story of strength and survival. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama. Your story matters. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.